Axel Leblois, you are the founder and director of the public-private global initiative for inclusive technologies that was launched by the United Nations. Recently, you were in New York for the Disabilities Convention at the UN. Tell us about it, that meeting.
Oh, it was a fantastic meeting. We, as you know, had the opportunity about 2 years ago to see for the first time ever an international convention signed and passed by the UN General Assembly, and then since then signed by 135 countries that for the first time defines the right of persons with disabilities. So it's really a milestone in history, certainly from a human rights standpoint. And it's a very practical success for a number of organizations of persons with disabilities around the world. So we were celebrating that day 2 years after the signing of the convention. And we were very, very happy to see that we had already 135 signatures completed and 45 ratifications by countries, meaning that convention now is getting into the laws and regulation of many, many different countries, which is fantastic.
How is it that the United Nations became so involved?
Well, I guess for those type of treaties, if you look at the history of human rights, the late part of the 20th century has made a lot of progress to define the right of women, the right of children, treaties around displaced population, and so on and so forth. And the logical place to actually design those texts and actually make sure they are adopted by most countries is logically the United Nations. So the United Nations, in other terms, serve as the kind of cradle for those texts and the human rights treaties, but then they have got to be adopted by the General Assembly to say, okay, this is the text that we recommend states to sign, state parties to sign, but then it has to be signed and ratified by each individual country for it to become an international treaty. So the treaty after that has its own life, independent of the United Nations of sorts, if you will. And that's the case for the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It is now a standalone international treaty signed by states all around the world. So that's the current status.
What kind of disabilities are we talking about?
Well, typically, in the past, there were some very limited and somewhat inaccurate so-called medical definition of disability. I think the disabilities in the convention are defined as the inability of society to offer the right interface with persons who have specific type of impairments. So the disability is actually both a result of a physical impairment or in certain cases of cognitive impairments, but also the result of the society inability to actually deal with it. So disability is a very, very intriguing definition nowadays. It's way more complicated than it seems to be on the surface, because it implies the interaction with the outside world.
As you have this greater awareness about disabilities and so forth, there's also been the development of the technologies.
Right.
And it sounds like you're bringing the two together.
Correct. So one of the issues that have been so important for persons with disabilities for so many years is the issue of accessibility. And typically, in the United States and a couple of other countries where legislation is already in place, like the ADA, American Disability Act in the US, or the American Rehabilitation Act in the US, you have a definition of accessibility right that is mostly focused on the physical environment, meaning access to building, to the streets, to public spaces, and so on and so forth, and access to transportation, and public transportation in particular. Now, the convention for the first time actually establishes the access to information and communication technology, in other terms to any kind of digital media, on par with the right to access to physical environments and transportation. And that has huge implications. Now, why is it so? When you look at the demographics around the world, it's quite astounding. You have today about 850 million personal computers around the world. You have about 1.4 million telephone landlines. You have 1.4 billion TV sets. You have 2.5 billion radios, but you have 3 billion cell phones. One human being out of two. So if you look at those unbelievable statistics, which shows to which extent nowadays digital interfaces are part of the life of every single human being on this planet, and you understand that digital interfaces, in most cases, are not accessible for persons with disabilities, then you see you have a huge issue. You have an issue for governments who use new media to communicate with their citizens. You have an issue for business in relation to their customers. You have an issue for education if it's not accessible to pupils and students with disabilities and so on and so forth. So those are the themes that the United Nations Global Alliance for ICT and Development felt were really important. That's why we created G3ICT, the global initiative for accessible technologies. And the reality is the potential there is really both to serve persons with disabilities and improve their access and their lives and their opportunities, and more importantly to push forward to get to equal treatment as much as is feasible everywhere. But also there is a huge opportunity for industry and services, because those applications of assistive technology and accessible technologies represent a very, very large market. And then for governments, it's also a huge opportunity, because the more they can help the process of providing persons with disabilities with the right tools to improve their lives and improve their access to everything from education to the workplace to all services, the better they are, financially, politically, socially, from an ethical and human rights standpoint. So it's what we call a win-win-win situation, if and only if people understand where to focus their effort and how to standardize the efforts so that the cost of those technologies is becoming affordable.
It also sounds like a carrot and stick situation, with the carrot being the advantages of human productivity. Is there much of a stick? Is there much of enforcement in place? We've heard of a class action settlement with the Target company. Are these sorts of cases coming up more regularly around the world?
Absolutely, and that's a very, very good example that you are raising here. I guess many people have seen the Target case lately in the press. It's a case where the website of the company was not accessible to consumers with visual impairments. And so they said, you know, well, we cannot benefit from your special offers, we can't do this, we can't do that, and so on and so forth. But I would tell you, for one case, which is Target, you will find out that a lot of websites around the world, maybe over 90% of them, including government websites, including in the United States, aren't accessible either. So it actually is a very interesting case, because for the first time, you have a very well documented case where, the lack of accessibility for a website is determined as being, a real liability for a big organization. And so I think from a stick standpoint, if you will, it's a very good case to help everybody else, essentially. But there are a lot of carrots. A lot of companies have identified very carefully the market for that disabled persons represent. And I think there is a gigantic myopic situation right now with many large consumer good companies. If you take the disposable income of a disabled person in the United States, it's about twice the disposable income of teenagers. And yet, you look at how much marketing money is spent on teenagers and how much is spent on disabled persons, and you will see there is a little gap here, which is actually irrational.